We're looking at the National 4 Unit 2 topic, genetic information. Today we'll learn about how the genes we inherit from our parents determine how we look. At the end of this, you should be able to carry out a cross between two parents and then predict what we call the genotype, i.e. the genes inherited, and therefore the appearance of the offspring of the two parents. You should also be able to identify the physical appearance of an organism based on its genotype, i.e. if I show you the genes it has, you tell me what it looks like. So to recap, what is genetic information? So DNA is shown to the picture to the right. It's a molecule found in the nucleus of the cell, and it carries the genetic information. This genetic information is the code which makes you, you. 99.9%, so almost all of your genetic information, is the same as every other human. The tiny 0.1% differences in our genetic information is what creates the variation. That's the differences that we see in humans, and that's why that you're unique. So, in terms of genetic terms, we have these big structures called chromosomes. Chromosomes are what carry your genetic material. The picture on the right there shows you two matching chromosomes. One came from the dad and one came from the mum. So you have 46 chromosomes in total if you're human. You have 23 from your dad, 23 from your mum. So we say there's 23 pairs of chromosomes. On these chromosomes, there are sections called genes. So in the picture here, you can see the blue bands. The first band is the gene for eye colour, and you've got one version from your dad and one version from your mum. You've got the gene for hair colour, one from dad and one from mum, the gene for blood type, and the gene for freckles or no freckles. And again, you always have two versions. So if you look at the gene for eye colour, maybe you have the same version from both parents, or maybe you get different versions, and then we have to look at what happens, because you can't be two different eye colours. So these genes determine what we look like, our physical appearance, and that's what we're going to look at today. So if you look at the father and mother here, you get half your DNA from your dad and half from your mum. So as I said, that means that for every gene you have two copies. Now look at the dad's chromosomes there. He has a blue gene and a white gene. So there's a 50-50 chance he'll either pass on the blue or the white. Now down below, child 1 and child 2 have inherited the blue gene from their dad. But child 3 and 4 inherit the white gene from their dad. So they've got half their DNA, the chromosome on the chromosome below came from their mum and dad. Now the mother also has blue and white. So in child 1, she passes on a blue, and so has the dad. So child 1 has blue and blue. Child 2 inherited blue from her dad, but inherited white from the mum. So she's got both blue and white in her DNA. Child 3 got the blue from the dad and the white from the mum. So child 3 has both blue and white, but from opposite parents. And child 4 happened to get the white from the dad and the white from the mum. So child 4 has white and white. So these colours just represent you can get different versions of the same gene depending which ones your parents pass on to you. Now if parents have blue and blue, they'll always pass on blue. If they have white and white, they'll always pass on white. It's this interesting situation when they have one of each, you get more variation, and each child has a different combination of the gene. And that's why humans have more variation. That's why sexual reproduction between two parents leads to greater variation, and this is a bonus for evolution, as it helps. And we can see this one closer up now. So pause the screen and have a look at which child got which colour from which parent. And then when you're ready to play, continue on. So phenotype is a phrase that we use to describe the physical appearance. That's why it starts with PH. So phenotype just means type of physical appearance. You always write this as a description. The genotype means what's the type of gene they got. So like in the last picture, did they get blue-blue or blue-white or white-white? For every gene you have two versions because you have two parents. We always show these using letters. So for example, for the phenotype brown hair and blonde hair, you have a gene for hair colour, and now you could have the gene capital B, which is brown, and lowercase, which is blonde. So what's your possible genotypes? Well, you could get a big B from your dad and a big B from your mum, so you'd be big B, big B. Your parents could both be blonde, so they both give you a small b from mum, a small b from your dad, and a small b, small b. However, you could have one brown-haired parent and one blonde-haired parent. You get the brown, big B from your dad, and the small b blonde from your mum. So you have a big B and a small b. So big B at the bottom equals brown. Small b equals blonde. But what would you look like if you were the big B and the small b person? Because you have both the brown hair gene and the blonde hair gene, but you can't be both. Now look at this. You have a kind of like blonde mouse and a black mouse. Now they have children. They've got 4 children. Then we call that the first generation. They all happen to be blonde. So which do you think is the dominant colour? Is it blonde or black? Hopefully you're thinking blonde. And the reason why is all of the children are blonde. Despite the fact they've got half their DNA from the black coat father, they all look blonde like the mother. Okay? So that means that it's dominant. It's not to do with it being the mother or the father. I just decided to make the blonde the mum and the black the dad. It was more a case of that only one can win out. So if I go back a slide, the big B, small b, the capital letter is always the dominant one. So this person who has a big B and a small b, they will look like the capital letter. So that last person is going to be brown. They carry the blonde hair gene, but it's hidden by the dominant capital brown gene. Okay, so in this one, we know that if all the F1 generation, the first generation, are brown, that makes brown dominant. If it's not dominant, the other word we use is recessive. So the dominant is the one that always shows. The one that's hidden, that's passed on, but you don't see it, is what we call recessive. Now you really need to know these names. In your test questions, you'll be looking at the dominant ones to see what the person looks like, or the animal looks like. So, the parent on the left was big B, parent on the right was small b, small b. Each parent gives half their DNA. So the blonde mouse has to give a capital B, the black mouse has to give a small b. So all the F1 end up being big and small, but they all look blonde, or brown in this example, because they have that capital letter. Okay, so dominant versus recessive. Dominant always shows in the appearance. It's always written as a capital letter. You only need one of these to look that way because it dominates. Recessive genes are hidden if you inherit a dominant gene. So this means for the offspring to have the recessive appearance, it must have 2 small letters. And that should be like small letters like A, B, or C, small case. So, if they said the genotype was big A, then that's easy. The phenotype will look whatever big A stands for. Look at the next 3, big B, big C, and small d. What do you think they'll look like? Well, for the big B, whatever big B stands for, that's what they'll look like because they only have big B. So that's easy, just like the A above. Now the next one has one of each. It has a capital and a lowercase. But remember the capital dominates, so that person will look like whatever the capital C stands for. The last one only has small letters, so that's easy again. They don't have a dominant, so they'll look like whatever the small d stands for, as they only have small d. So on the left we've got genotypes, and the red box says these are always written as 2 letters, because you get one from each parent, so every genotype has 2 versions of the gene. Note the letters are always the same. You can either have a capital or lowercase, but it's always 2 letters and always the same letter. If you ask for phenotype, this is always a description. So in this one I didn't give you any, it would just be whatever A or B or C or D stands for in the key, and you'll be given that with each question. So let's look at some examples. Say there's your 2 chromosomes, one from mum, one from dad. This is the gene to have freckles or no freckles. Now chromosome 1 has the version of the gene that has freckles, chromosome 2 has the version that has no freckles. So you can't have both freckles and no freckles. So the dominant one will show. So looking at this, remember what we just said, which one do you think is dominant, freckles or no freckles? Hopefully remember that capital's dominant, so that means this person will be freckles. Although they have the gene for no freckles, it's hidden by the capital, so the freckles dominates and they will look freckled. Okay, so this is about hair. Again, the person from their dad, or chromosome 1, has inherited a small c, and that's no widow's peak. And the second chromosome has a big C, widow's peak. So what will they look like? Again, think which one's the dominant one, that's what they will look like. So, capital is dominant, which means they will look like the widow's peak. And that's what that looks like. When your hair isn't straight across your hairline, it comes in a little bit like Dracula, that's a widow's peak. Okay? So again, because that's dominant, this person has both versions, but the dominant wins, and that's the one that shows. Okay, so for this, I've used W to highlight. You have to make it really clear between your capitals and lowercase letters. Now this is attached to your lobes, and it's attached to your lobes both times, and these are small W's. So what will this person look like? Well, there is no dominant letter, but they've got attached and attached, so of course they're going to be attached. So is attached earlobes recessive or dominant? So the only reason they have it is because they have 2 small letters, so that makes it recessive. Okay, they only have it because it's two small letters. Because remember, dominants are written as capitals. So that is your attached earlobe there, small letter, so it's a recessive characteristic. How would you write the genotype for unattached earlobes then? So if small is attached, how would you write down unattached? Try that now. Hopefully you've written two letters. You have to use W because you can't change the letters. If the recessive is small, the dominant is capital. There's two ways you could write this. Capital, or remember it could be capital and lowercase, because in that case the capital always wins and you would still look like the unattached earlobes. Okay, so pause this and write down what this animal will look like. You should be writing down three characteristics, because left to right here there's three different genes. It's just you've got two copies of each gene. So 3 genes, 3 phenotypes, 3 characteristics. So pause the video and write down what this will look like. Remember, the dominant is the one that shows. So this person, or this animal, look for the dominance of the capitals. So capital B stands for long tail, so it'll have a long tail. Capital N stands for green eyes, so it'll have green eyes. Now the next one, the first one's a small letter, so look down for the big letter, they'll have small ears. So this one would be long-tailed, green-eyed, and small-eared, because the capital letters are the ones that dominate. So let's look at this one. We've got green peas and we've got yellow peas. If all the F1 are green, which is the dominant characteristic? Hopefully you're thinking it's the green peas. So green are dominant, that makes the yellow recessive. If we put letters in then, so let's use G for green. Now some folk might think, oh, I'll use a Y for yellow, but remember, it's the same gene, so it has to be the same letter. So capital we put to the dominant. That makes the other one has to be small because it's recessive. So if it was a big G and a small g, it would also be green, so it must be small g. The rule is you pass on half your DNA. So the first generation gets one capital from one parent and one lowercase g from the other parent, making them all heterozygous, okay? They have one of each. But this makes them all green because they have a dominant. Okay, let's try another one. So here we've got 3 people. The one in the left, the one in the middle, and the one in the right. We know it's 3 people because each person has 2 chromosomes, 2 sets of chromosomes. At the top it says blue eyes are recessive and brown eyes are dominant. Now from that information, you should be able to tell me which each person looks like. So again, pause, and then when you're ready, unpause, and we'll go over the answers. So person 1 has blue and brown, but they will be brown-eyed because brown is dominant. Person 2 is easy. They only have brown and brown, so that's 2 dominants, they'll be brown. And person 3 only has blue. Now blue is recessive, but if you have 2 recessives, you'll look like blue because they have no dominant. Okay, so here's 2 chromosomes for my child. You've got the genes for eye colour, tongue roller ability, and the type of earlobes found on the chromosomes. So it's 3 genes, but 2 versions of each. The forms of each gene are represented by a letter. Now, to finish this sentence, you would delete the ones that are wrong. So tell me what this child will look like. To do that, you have to think which one will show. The dominant shows. How is dominant written? And we know that will tell you. So pause and then play when you're ready for the answer. So capitals are dominants, so this will be brown-eyed. Tongue rolling is dominant, so they'll be able to tongue roll. And they've got a dominant unattached earlobes, so they'll be unattached. So this person will be brown-eyed, a tongue roller, and they have unattached earlobes because that's the dominant genes they've inherited, and they are the ones that will show in their phenotype. Okay, so last one. True breeding is when we cross 2 different parents, like we've been doing with the mice and with the peas. So 2 parents that look different, but all the offspring look the same. They're all going to look like the dominant characteristic. So let's look at hair appearance in mice. It's controlled by a single gene. You can either have the wavy hair version, and we're going to put that as a capital H because it's the dominant, and the other option is straight hair. Now if wavy hair is dominant, that means straight hair must be recessive, so we give it a small h. Now if 2 mice were crossed, one had wavy hair and one had straight hair. So beneath that, can you put the genotypes? That means put the 2 letters that represent that phenotype. So what 2 letters would you put down for wavy hair, and what 2 letters would you put down for straight hair? Now remember, all of their children are going to look the same, so that means there's no variation. So for each parent, they will have the same letter. Okay, now straight hair is recessive, so it must be small h, small h. Wavy hair, you might be thinking, well, it could be big H, small h, and you're right, but if that's true, some of the offspring will inherit a small h, but we said that all offspring will be the same. In true breeding, the parents don't have a mix. In true breeding, they always pass on the same allele. So it must be a parent with a capital capital, and it must be a parent with a small small. Now if we did that, and we have the offspring, if you write this down in your jotter, like one parent big H, one parent small h, you take one letter from each parent to give the child. So the offspring would look like that, big H, small h. Now the first question says, what is the phenotype of the first generation of mice? So you have to know that first generation means the offspring of the parents. So that is that big H, small h. But the question says, what's the phenotype? So if you write big H, small h, you're wrong, because the question is asked for phenotype. PH stands for physical appearance. So that question is asking you, what does the first generation look like? So they have a big H and a small h. Remember, big H is dominant, so it wins, so they will all look wavy-haired. Yeah? The second question asks, what's the genotype? When you're asked that, that's when you write the two letters down. Okay? Now, you can go back through this from the start and practice these questions. When you're able to do these questions correctly in the video, you're ready for your Nash 4 test question.